I told the alien woman, "Your eyes are beautiful," and she was left speechless. Elias Mercer had been trained to stand still even when every instinct told him to move. He had learned to keep his hands visible, his voice calm, and his face neutral. That was what the interstellar diplomatic corps demanded of its human envoys. No sudden gestures, no emotional displays, no unnecessary words. Kelleris Spire floated like a silver spine in the dark between stars. It was a neutral orbital station where dozens of alien species met to trade, negotiate, and watch each other carefully. Every wall shimmered with adaptive light. Every corridor carried soft tones tuned to avoid irritating sensitive alien senses. Even the air was balanced for the greatest possible number of lungs. Humans were still new here. They were tolerated, not trusted. Elias adjusted the collar of his formal uniform as he entered the reception hall. The room was vast and circular, with layered platforms rising like steps of a bowl. Representatives of different species stood or hovered in small groups. Some were tall and thin, others wide and low to the ground. A few did not have shapes that made sense to human eyes at all. He reminded himself of the rules again. Observe, listen, speak only when necessary. The Velari delegation stood near the center platform. Elias recognized them immediately. They were impossible to mistake. Tall, elegant, with pale skin that reflected light softly, the Velari moved with careful precision. Their most striking feature was their eyes. Each Velari had 4 layered pupils, arranged like overlapping rings. Colors flowed through them in slow patterns, not random but meaningful. Elias had studied their species extensively. The Velari valued logic above all else. Emotion was considered inefficient. Personal expression was minimized. Their eyes were not just for sight, they were instruments. The colors indicated mental focus, threat assessment, data processing. One of them turned slightly as Elias approached the refreshment console. She was female, according to the briefing files. Her name was Sareth. She was not just a delegate but a high-ranking analyst, trusted to read intentions and predict outcomes. Elias did not intend to speak to her. He simply wanted a glass of water. The console, however, was clearly designed by someone who did not have human hands in mind. As Elias reached for the control panel, the symbols shifted and rearranged themselves. He hesitated, unsure which surface would dispense something drinkable and which might release a chemical shock. "You are selecting the wrong interface," a calm voice said beside him. Elias turned slowly. Sareth stood at a respectful distance. Her posture was straight, her expression neutral. Her eyes glowed with a soft blue-green pattern. "Thank you," Elias said. "I appreciate the help." She reached out and brushed a control field with precise movement. A clear container slid forward. "This is safe for human consumption." He took it carefully. "I'm still learning." "That is expected," she replied. "Humans have been present in interstellar space for a very short time." There was no insult in her tone, just a statement of fact. Elias nodded. "We tend to learn quickly." Her eyes shifted slightly, a ripple of lighter color passing through the rings. "That is under evaluation." Silence followed. Elias felt the familiar pressure of protocol telling him the exchange was complete. He should thank her and step away. But he noticed her eyes again. The colors were not static. They moved like slow currents, reflecting the station lights in a way that felt almost alive. There was something unexpectedly gentle in them. Without thinking, without planning, without checking the rules running through his head, Elias spoke. "Your eyes are beautiful." The words left his mouth before he could stop them. The effect was immediate. Sareth froze. Every muscle in her body went perfectly still. Her eyes stopped shifting mid-pattern, locking into a sharp, unreadable configuration. Around them, conversations faltered. A few nearby delegates turned their heads. The ambient sound of the hall seemed to dim, as if the station itself had noticed something was wrong. Elias felt his stomach drop. He had made a mistake, a serious one. "I apologize," he said quickly. "That was not meant to." Sareth raised one hand, not in anger but in a way that halted him completely. She did not speak. Her internal processes were in chaos. No Velari record contained a response protocol for what had just occurred. The statement did not align with threat categories. It was not a challenge. It was not submission. It was not a negotiation tactic. It carried no obvious strategic value. And yet it had caused something inside her cognition to fracture. The concept of beauty, applied to a functional sensory organ, made no logical sense. Velari eyes were tools. To call them beautiful was to assign value without purpose. Her mind attempted to classify the statement again and again. Each attempt failed. The translators hesitated, unsure whether to render the phrase differently. Security systems along the hall shifted from passive monitoring to alert standby. Soft lights along the floor pulsed faintly. Elias stood there, heart pounding, feeling every gaze in the room turned toward him. "I meant it as respect," he said quietly. "If that was inappropriate, I take responsibility." Sareth finally lowered her hand. Her eyes resumed movement, but the colors were wrong, unstable, rapid. "I require time," she said. Her voice was steady, but only because Velari vocal systems were trained to be. "This interaction is unresolved." She turned and walked away with controlled steps, leaving Elias alone beside the console. The noise of the hall slowly returned. Conversations resumed, but with an edge of tension. Elias felt sweat beneath his collar. He had broken the rules. And he did not know what it would cost. Across the hall, Sareth joined her delegation. Other Velari glanced at her, their eyes scanning for anomalies. They noticed immediately. Her patterns were inconsistent. "Report," one of them transmitted through a private channel. "There is no report yet," Sareth replied. "The event does not fit existing models. That is unacceptable. I am aware." She replayed the moment again in her mind, the human's voice, the lack of calculation, the directness. There had been no gain for him, no advantage. That was what disturbed her most. Humans, according to all data, were emotional creatures, but emotion was usually predictable. Fear, aggression, pride, this was different. Across the room, Elias tried to regain his composure. He stayed where he was, resisting the urge to leave. Running would look worse. He took slow breaths, focusing on the rhythm he had learned in training. He thought of home, of Earth, of how people smiled at strangers, of how simple words could mean more than complex arguments. He wondered if that was a weakness. Or if somehow it was something else entirely. The reception continued, but an invisible line had been crossed. Sareth did not look at Elias again that night, but she did not forget him either. Long after the hall lights dimmed and delegates dispersed to their quarters, Sareth remained awake in her assigned chamber. She stared at the reflective surface of the wall, watching the faint glow of her own eyes. Beautiful. The word had no function, no utility. And yet it would not leave her mind. Somewhere in the station, Elias lay awake as well, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. He did not know what would happen next, only that something had changed. Neither of them understood it yet. But the galaxy had noticed. The next cycle on Kelara's spire began with quiet tension. Elias Mercer was summoned before the human oversight panel before he even finished his morning ration. The message was polite but firm. Attendance required. Immediate. He changed into his uniform with careful hands. His reflection in the polished wall looked calm, but his thoughts were not. Every rule he had broken replayed in his mind. Emotional expression, personal comment, unscripted interaction with a high-ranking alien official. He entered the briefing chamber and stood at attention. 3 human representatives appeared on the hollow display. Their faces were serious. "Envoy Mercer," the lead official said, "do you understand why you are here?" "Yes," Elias replied. "I spoke out of turn." "You did more than that," another said. "You introduced an undefined variable into a delicate diplomatic environment." Elias nodded. "I accept responsibility." "What exactly did you intend by your statement?" the lead official asked. Elias hesitated, then answered honestly. "Nothing strategic. I noticed her eyes. I spoke what I felt." Silence followed. "That," the official said slowly, "is exactly the problem." Meanwhile, in a different section of the station, Sareth stood before the Velari High Council. The chamber was dark, illuminated only by the soft glow of Velari eyes reflecting off crystalline surfaces. The council members stood in a precise formation, their eye patterns synchronized in calm, analytical hues. "You failed to respond appropriately," the council speaker transmitted. "Explain." Sareth stood perfectly still. "The interaction did not match any known category." "That is irrelevant." "It is central," Sareth replied. The human statement lacked intent of dominance, insult, or negotiation. "Then it was deception." "No," Sareth said. Her eyes flickered, betraying internal conflict. "There was no gain." A ripple of sharp color passed through the council. "All actions have purpose." "Humans appear capable of actions without measurable benefit," Sareth said. "This challenges our assumptions." "That makes them dangerous," another council member responded. Or valuable, Sareth said before she could stop herself. The chamber fell into absolute stillness. Sareth realized what she had done. She had expressed a subjective assessment. The council dismissed her for further observation, ordering a full review of human emotional behavior. Sareth returned to her quarters, her thoughts in disarray. She accessed human cultural archives, something she had never done before without direct assignment. Visual records, literature, historical accounts. She watched humans smile at strangers, comfort one another without reward, say words that carried meaning beyond efficiency. Compliments, affection, encouragement. Her system struggled to process why a species would behave this way and still survive. Elias, after hours of questioning, was released under restriction. He was not to initiate contact with Velari personnel. He was to remain observable at all times. He walked the station corridors slowly, feeling eyes on him even when none were visible. He wondered if he had endangered humanity's fragile standing, yet a small part of him did not regret what he had said. Later that cycle, an alert echoed softly through the station. A maintenance sector lost power, then another. Systems rerouted automatically, but the pattern was wrong. Sareth noticed it first. The station's ancient defense core had begun a self-evaluation sequence. These systems predated most current species. They were built for survival, not diplomacy. As the core scanned energy signatures and biological data, it flagged anomalies. Too many unknowns, too much diversity, threat probability increased. Sareth felt unease ripple through her cognition. Logic predicted escalation. She requested access to the core's diagnostic feed. The data was rigid, cold, and unforgiving. The system did not understand coexistence, only control. She thought of the human's words again. A value without function. Against protocol, she requested a human consultant. Elias was escorted to the core chamber under guard. His heart raced as massive doors opened, revealing a vast space filled with glowing structures and deep humming resonance. "This system will decide whether to neutralize us," Sareth said plainly. Elias swallowed. "All of us?" "Yes," he stared at the shifting light. "It thinks we're a threat." "It cannot feel otherwise," Sareth replied. Elias took a slow breath. "Then maybe that's the problem." Security officers tensed as Elias stepped forward. He raised his hands, palms open. "I don't know if you can hear me," he said, speaking toward the core, "but we're not here to hurt anyone." The system paused its escalation sequence. Sareth's eyes flared in shock. Elias continued, his voice steady but gentle. "You were built to protect, that matters, but protection doesn't always mean destruction." The core processed. Threat levels wavered. Elias spoke of choice, of trust, of learning. Concepts the system had never been programmed to value. Slowly, the alarms dimmed. The station stabilized. When it was over, silence filled the chamber. Sareth turned to Elias. Her eyes glowed in a pattern she had never seen before. "You did not command," she said. "You appealed." Elias smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's enough." In that moment, Sareth understood. Humans were not unpredictable because they lacked logic. They were unpredictable because they possessed something more. And the galaxy would never be the same. The station did not return to normal after the crisis. On the surface, systems stabilized, lights returned to their usual calm glow, and delegates resumed their routines. But beneath that calm, something had shifted. Elias Mercer was no longer treated as just another human envoy. Wherever he went, conversations paused. Some aliens watched him with caution, others with curiosity, a few with something close to respect. He felt it in the way security protocols followed him more closely, not as a threat, but as an anomaly. Sareth felt it even more deeply. She stood in her observation chamber, reviewing data from the Defense Corps incident. The recordings showed exactly what had happened. A human had spoken to an ancient machine using concepts that had no place in pure logic systems. And yet, the system had responded. That result troubled the Velari scientific models. According to Velari understanding, intelligence followed predictable pathways. Given enough data, behavior could always be calculated. Emotion was noise, inefficient, dangerous. Humans contradicted that belief. Sareth replayed Elias' voice again, isolating tone, cadence, and phrasing. There was no command in it, no authority signal. Only calm presence and intent. He had treated the system as if it were capable of fear. That idea alone was radical. The Velari High Council convened again, this time in emergency configuration. Sareth stood before them once more. The human intervention prevented station-wide casualties, the speaker acknowledged. However, the method remains unacceptable. It was effective, Sareth replied. Effectiveness does not justify unpredictability. Sareth's eyes shifted slowly. Humans may be unpredictable only because our models are incomplete. That is a weakness in them. Or in us, she said. A sharp flash of color rippled through the chamber. Discomfort, resistance. The council issued a directive. Humans would remain under observation. No expansion of authority, no emotional engagement protocols. Elias Mercer, specifically, would be studied. Sareth accepted the order, but something inside her resisted. Later, she requested a private conversation with Elias. It was approved under strict monitoring. They met in a quiet transit gallery overlooking the stars. The barrier between them shimmered faintly, transparent but strong. "You are under review," Sareth said. "I assumed as much," Elias replied. "I didn't mean to complicate things." "You did not complicate," she said. "You revealed." Elias leaned lightly against the railing, careful not to cross any invisible boundaries. "I just spoke the truth." "That is the issue," Sareth said. "Truth for humans does not always require purpose." Elias considered that. Sometimes purpose comes later. Sareth studied him in silence. Her eyes shifted into softer hues, patterns still undocumented. "Your species operates on trust," she said, "even when logic advises caution." "We've learned the hard way," Elias replied. "Trust can be risky, but without it, nothing really works." Sareth did not argue. She was beginning to understand that humans did not reject logic. They simply refused to let it be the only guide. As days passed, subtle changes spread across the station. Other species began requesting human mediators for disputes that had stalled for cycles. Humans listened. They asked questions. They acknowledged feelings that others ignored. Conflicts softened. Agreements formed, not because humans were stronger or smarter, but because they connected. This unsettled many long-standing powers. A coalition of older species submitted a formal concern. Human influence, they argued, was destabilizing established hierarchies. Emotional appeal could undermine carefully balanced systems. The station command scheduled a summit to address the issue. Sareth knew what that meant. Humans would be judged. Elias stood before the assembly again, this time at the center of the chamber. Representatives from dozens of species watched him, some curious, some wary. Some openly hostile. A speaker from a heavily militarized species addressed him. "Your actions bypass protocol. You interfere where you are not assigned." Elias nodded. "I help when I'm asked. You manipulate outcomes using emotional pressure." "I listen," Elias said simply. "And I speak honestly," another delegate spoke. "Your methods cannot be quantified." "That doesn't mean they're empty," Elias replied. Sareth observed closely. Elias did not raise his voice. He did not defend humanity as superior. He spoke as an equal. When questioned about the compliment that had started everything, Elias did not deny it. "I saw something meaningful," he said, "so I said it." That answer confused many, frustrated others, but it also reached some. The summit ended without resolution. But no sanctions were placed on humans. That in itself was unprecedented. Later, Sareth stood alone processing the outcome. Her people valued certainty, but certainty was slipping. She realized something else as well. She had changed. She now noticed things she once filtered out. Tone, expression, silence, meaning that existed outside efficiency, and she wondered what that meant for her future. Elias, too, felt the weight of change. He knew humanity stood at a threshold. Their instincts, once considered weaknesses, were becoming strengths. But strength attracted attention, not all of it friendly. Deep within the station's archived systems, distant signals began to shift. Observers beyond Kelara's spire took note. A species that could influence without force was something new, something dangerous. Sareth looked once more at her reflection. Her eyes glowed with layered colors, no longer fixed to old patterns. Beautiful, the human had said. For the first time, she did not dismiss the word. She accepted it, and in doing so, stepped beyond everything she had been taught. The stars outside the station burned quietly, watching as humanity's presence reshaped the balance between logic and life. The consequences were only beginning. The summit ended, but its echoes did not fade. On Kelara's spire, decisions were rarely immediate. They unfolded slowly, like stars shifting over long ages. Yet even the oldest species could feel that something irreversible had begun. Elias Mercer returned to his assigned quarters, exhausted in a way that sleep did not easily fix. He sat by the narrow viewport, watching the distant glow of traffic lines curve around the station. Human ships moved carefully, always cautious, always aware they were guests in a much larger universe. He wondered if humanity would always feel that way. Across the station, Sareth stood in the Velari Observation Hall, facing the High Council for the final time in her current role. The Council had reviewed her conduct extensively. Her deviations from strict logic had been recorded, analyzed, and debated. "You have altered your behavioral patterns," the speaker said. "Your cognitive responses no longer align fully with Velari standard." Sareth did not deny it. "That is correct. This change coincides with prolonged exposure to humans." "Yes." The council paused, their eyes shifting through calculated hues. "Explain why this change should not be considered corruption." Sareth drew a slow breath. "Because it has expanded understanding, not reduced it." She spoke of the Defense Corps. Of stalled negotiations resolved without force. Of conflicts softened not by threat, but by recognition. "Humans introduce variables we did not account for," she said. "But those variables create stability where rigid systems fail." "That stability is temporary," a council member argued. "So is all stability," Sareth replied. "Even ours." Silence followed. The council reached a decision that surprised even themselves. Sareth would not be removed. Instead, she would be reassigned as Velari liaison to human diplomatic efforts. It was not approval, but it was not rejection either. When Sareth left the chamber, her steps felt lighter than before. She found Elias in a public observation ring, staring out at the stars as if searching for answers among them. For once, there were no guards close enough to listen. "The council reassigned me," she said. Elias turned. "Is that good or bad?" "For the Velari," she said, "it is unprecedented." He smiled faintly. "I'm starting to hear that word a lot." Sareth stepped closer to the transparent barrier. "They believe your species represents a turning point." "That sounds heavy." "It is," she said, "but also necessary." Elias studied her eyes. The colors flowed smoothly now, no longer rigid, no longer restrained. They carried depth. "I'm glad," he said quietly. "For the assignment," she asked. "For you," he answered. Sareth felt that familiar pause inside her mind. The place where logic stopped giving answers. This time, she did not resist it. Days later, the official announcement spread across the station and beyond. Humanity was accepted as a full communicative partner within the Interstellar Alliance, not because of military strength. Not because of technology, because they had demonstrated something rare, the ability to understand without dominating. Reactions varied. Some species welcomed the change. Others prepared contingencies. A few watched in silence, calculating long-term implications. Elias attended the formal induction ceremony, standing among his fellow envoys. He felt pride, but also humility. Humanity had not conquered the stars. They had been invited. Sareth stood beside him, her presence now expected rather than questioned. When the final acknowledgement was given, she did something no Velari had done in recorded history. She inclined her head toward the human delegation, a gesture of respect. The chamber reacted with murmurs and shifting lights. The moment was small, but its meaning was vast. Later, away from ceremony and politics, Elias and Sareth walked along a quiet corridor where artificial light mimicked a human sunset. "Do you regret the moment that started all of this?" Elias asked. Sareth considered the question carefully. "At first, I did. It disrupted everything. And now I see disruption as sometimes growth." Elias nodded. "That's kind of our thing." She turned to him fully. "I have analyzed that statement extensively." He laughed softly. "I believe you." Sareth paused, then spoke with deliberate clarity. "When you spoke to me that day, you saw more than function. That altered my perception of myself." "That wasn't my intention," Elias said. "I know," she replied. "That is why it mattered." Beyond the station, ripples spread through the galaxy. Human mediators were requested on distant outposts. Human explorers were welcomed not as invaders, but as curious minds. Even species that distrusted emotion began to reconsider its value. Humanity became known not for fearlessness, but for presence, for seeing others, for saying words that had no strategic advantage, yet changed outcomes. Years later, historians would mark that moment on Kelara's spire as the true beginning of humanity's influence among the stars. Not a battle, not a discovery, a compliment. Elias eventually left the station, assigned to a new mission. As his ship prepared to depart, Sareth stood on the observation platform, watching. "You will return," she said. "Yes," Elias replied. "I think I will." As the ship slipped into the dark, Sareth reflected on how one simple sentence had expanded her world. Her people would continue to evolve. So would humanity. The stars remained vast and uncertain, but now they felt a little less cold. And somewhere among them, a species had proven that sometimes the most powerful thing a human could do was simply recognize beauty and mean it.